Imagine standing in complete darkness, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and animal fat. Your only light, a flickering flame that casts dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. You're not here to hide from a storm or to seek shelter from a predator. You are here to create something that will outlast you, your children, and your entire civilization by tens of thousands of years. The question that has haunted archaeologists for over a century is not how these ancient artists painted these masterpieces, but why they bothered at all. Why would a prehistoric human, who spent every waking moment hunting, gathering, and struggling to survive, crawl into the pitch-black belly of a cave to paint a bison that no one would ever see? The answer is far stranger and more profound than you might imagine. Let's start with the most obvious explanation, the one that feels comfortable to our modern brains. They did it for art's sake. The idea of art for art's sake is a 19th century romantic notion that suggests early humans were simply expressing their innate creativity, like a caveman Michelangelo compelled by beauty. But this theory crumbles the moment you step into the real caves. The Chauvet cave in southern France, sealed for over 30,000 years by a rockfall, contains over 400 paintings of lions, rhinos, and mammoths. These are not the crude stick figures you drew in kindergarten. These are sophisticated, multi-layered compositions using perspective, shading, and the natural contours of the rock to create a three-dimensional effect. The artists used the bumps and cracks in the limestone to give volume to a horse's flank or the curve of a bison's hump. They even incorporated the shape of stalactites to create the illusion of a charging rhino's horn. This is not the work of a bored hunter doodling on a wall. This is the work of a specialist, someone who spent years mastering their craft. But here's the puzzle. These masterpieces were painted in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the caves, often hundreds of meters from the entrance. At Lascaux, you have to crawl through a narrow passage just a few feet high to reach the famous Hall of the Bulls. At Chauvet, the artists had to descend into a vast underground chamber, crossing a field of bare bones to reach their canvas. Why would you go to all that trouble if your only goal was to decorate? The effort required to light these spaces alone is staggering. The painters used torches made from juniper branches, which burned for about an hour each. They also carved stone lamps, filling them with animal fat and using a wick of lichen or moss. To illuminate the Hall of the Bulls at Lascaux, you would need at least a dozen lamps burning simultaneously, which means someone had to carry all that fuel through the dark. This was not a casual afternoon activity. It was a logistical operation. So, if it wasn't just decoration, what was it? Perhaps the most famous theory came from the French archaeologist Abbé Henri Breuil in the early 1900s. He proposed that the cave paintings were a form of sympathetic magic. The idea is simple. If you paint a bison with a spear in its side, you'll have better luck hunting real bison. It is a pre-rational attempt to control the world through imagery. This theory has a lot of intuitive appeal. Many of the animals painted are the large herbivores that early humans hunted: bison, aurochs, horses, and reindeer. And many of these animals are shown with wounds, arrows, or spears piercing their bodies. At the cave of Peshmerl, a spotted horse is painted with what looks like a harpoon in its flank. At Lascaux, a bison is shown with its guts spilling out, a spear lodged in its shoulder. It is easy to imagine a hunter staring at this image before a hunt, believing that the painting gave him power over the animal. But this theory has a fatal flaw. If the paintings were about hunting magic, why are the most dangerous predators, lions, bears, and rhinos, so prominently featured? At Chauvet, over 60% of the animals depicted are not prey species. They are predators. There are cave lions with their eyes glowing in the torchlight, rhinos locking horns in combat, and bears with their jaws open. Why would you perform hunting magic on a cave lion? You don't hunt lions for food. You run from them. Unless the magic was not about killing, but about something else entirely. Maybe the paintings were not about the animals themselves, but about the act of painting them. Think about the physical experience of being in that cave. The darkness is absolute. The silence is so thick you can hear your own heartbeat. The only sound is the crackling of your torch and the drip of water from the stalactites. Your brain, deprived of normal sensory input, begins to hallucinate. The shadows on the wall start to move. The rock formations look like faces, like animals, like spirits. Modern researchers have found that prolonged exposure to darkness and rhythmic sounds can induce altered states of consciousness. The anthropologist David Lewis Williams studied the Sand people of southern Africa, who used similar trance states in their rock art. He noticed that the geometric patterns the sand saw during their trances, dots, grids, zigzags, are exactly the same as the abstract symbols found in Paleolithic caves. At Lascaux, there are rows of red dots, a grid of squares, and a strange bird-headed man. At Peshmerl, there are hand stencils surrounded by dots, as if the artist was trying to capture the aura of a vision. Lewis Williams argued that the cave itself was a portal to the spirit world. The artists were shamans, entering a trance state to communicate with the supernatural. The animals they painted were not real animals. They were spirit guides, guardians of the underworld. The cave walls were a membrane between the physical world and the spiritual one, and the paintings were a way to touch that world. This is a powerful theory, but it still leaves a gap. Why did they choose these particular animals? Why lions and rhinos and bears? Why not deer or rabbits? To answer that, you need to look at the human brain itself. There's a phenomenon called pareidolia, where the brain sees familiar shapes in random patterns. You see a face in a cloud or a rabbit in a stain on the wall. The ancient artists were masters of pareidolia. They saw the shape of a bison in a bulge of rock, and they simply outlined it with charcoal. They saw a horse's head in a stalactite, and they added an eye. But this is not just a trick of the mind. It is a survival instinct. Your brain evolved to quickly identify animals in the landscape, because mistaking a shadow for a predator could get you killed. The cave artists were exploiting this ancient circuit, using the natural features of the cave to trigger a deep, primal recognition. Now, let's consider a completely different angle, the social function of the paintings. Maybe the caves were not temples or art galleries. Maybe they were classrooms. The anthropologist John Halverson proposed that the paintings served as teaching tools for young hunters. Imagine a group of adolescents, on the cusp of adulthood, being led into the dark cave for an initiation ritual. The elders show them a painting of a bison, explaining the anatomy, the weak points, the best angle for a spear thrust. The painting is a diagram, a three-dimensional textbook. The cave is a school. This idea is supported by the fact that many of the animals are shown in motion. A horse galloping, a bison turning to face a threat. These are not static images. They are freeze frames of behavior. The young hunter learns to read the animal's body language to predict its next move. But even this theory fails to explain the sheer scale of the art. At Lascaux, the main chamber is 60 feet long, covered in dozens of animals, some of them 15 feet tall. This is not a classroom. This is a cathedral. Perhaps the answer lies not in the paintings themselves, but in the act of making them. Recent experiments by archaeologists have shown that painting a single large animal, like a bison, requires about 8 hours of continuous work. But the real cost is not the time. It is the fuel. To keep the lamps burning for 8 hours, you need about 20 pounds of animal fat. To get that fat, you need to kill several animals. Then you need to render the fat, soak the wicks, and carry it all into the cave. This is a huge investment of energy for a group of hunter-gatherers who lived on the edge of starvation. Why would they spend so much energy on something that doesn't provide food, shelter, or protection, unless it provided something even more valuable, social cohesion? In small hunter-gatherer bands, conflict is inevitable. Fights over food, mates, or status can tear a group apart. The cave paintings might have been a way to defuse that tension. The anthropologist Brian Hayden proposed that the caves were ritual centers where different bands would gather for feasts and ceremonies. The paintings were the backdrop for these gatherings, a shared symbol that united the groups. The act of painting itself might have been a collaborative ritual, a way to reinforce social bonds. Imagine a group of people working together in the dark, their hands covered in ochre, their voices echoing off the stone. They're not just painting animals. They are painting their identity. They're saying, "We are the people who paint the bison." This is a powerful idea but it still doesn't answer the most fundamental question. Why caves? Why not paint on the walls of your shelter where everyone can see them every day? Why go to the deep, dangerous, dark places? The answer might lie in the very nature of the cave itself. A cave is a liminal space, a threshold between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It is a place where the boundaries of reality are thin. For early humans, the cave was a womb. It was the belly of the earth, the place where life emerged from the darkness. The paintings were not just images. They were acts of creation. By painting a bison on the wall, the artist was not just depicting a bison. He was bringing a bison into existence. This is the theory of ontological art, where the painting does not represent reality, but creates it. The artist is a co-creator with the forces of nature. This is why the paintings are so vivid, so alive. They are not meant to be looked at. They are meant to be experienced. When you stand in front of a painted bison at Lascaux, you feel its presence. You feel the weight of its body, the heat of its breath. The artist used the curve of the rock to make the bison's shoulder bulge outward, as if it is about to step off the wall. This is not a coincidence. This is a deliberate technique to create a sense of animacy. The bison is not a picture. It is a spirit. And now, we arrive at the most recent, and perhaps the most radical, theory. In the last decade, a team of researchers led by the archaeologist Genevieve von Petzinger has analyzed the geometric symbols found in caves across Europe. She found that there are only 32 distinct symbols, repeated for over 20,000 years. These symbols, dots, lines, triangles, zigzags, are not random doodles. They are code. Von Petzinger argues that these symbols might be the earliest form of graphic communication, a proto-writing system. The dots could represent numbers, the lines could represent directions, the triangles could represent mountains. The animals might not be the main message. They might be the illustrations for a text that we cannot read. If this is true, then the caves are not just art galleries or temples. They are libraries. They are storage devices for information that was too important to forget. Information about migrations, about seasonal cycles, about the behavior of animals. The paintings are not magic. They are data. This would explain why the same symbols appear in caves hundreds of miles apart. They're a shared system of notation, passed down through generations. The caves are a network of knowledge, a prehistoric internet. But even this theory has its limits. If the symbols are a form of writing, why did it take another 10,000 years for true writing to emerge? Why did the system not evolve? Perhaps because it was not meant to be read. Perhaps the symbols were not words, but sounds. The archaeologist Stephen Mithen has proposed that the caves were used for acoustic rituals. He recorded the acoustics of several caves and found that the best paintings are located in the areas with the most interesting echoes and resonances. The caves are natural amplifiers. The sound of a drum, a chant, or a human voice would have been transformed by the stone, creating a sense of awe and otherworldliness. The paintings might have been a visual representation of the sounds. The dots and lines could be musical notation. The animals could be the characters in a song. When you sing in front of a painting of a bison, you are not just singing about a bison. You are making the bison sing back. This is the power of the cave. It is a place where the senses merge, where sight and sound become one. The artist was not just a painter. He was a composer, a conductor of a symphony of stone and fire. So after all these theories, what is the real answer? Why did ancient humans start painting caves? The truth is that there is no single answer. The caves were not used for just one purpose. They were used for many purposes over thousands of years. Some caves were used for initiation rituals. Some were used for hunting magic. Some were used for shamanic trances. Some were used for storytelling. Some were used for data storage. And some were used for pure, unadulterated joy. The act of painting itself was a reward. It was a way to make sense of the world, to impose order on chaos, to leave a mark that said, I was here. And in that sense, the ancient painters are not so different from you. When you take a photograph, when you post on social media, when you write your name in the sand, you are doing the same thing. You're trying to connect with something larger than yourself. You're trying to make your life mean something. The cave painters did not have Instagram. They had the stone. They did not have followers. They had the spirits. But the impulse is the same. It is the impulse to create, to communicate, to transcend. And that impulse is as old as humanity itself. The next time you see a picture of a painted bison, do not just see an ancient artifact. See a person who crawled into the darkness, who lit a fire, who mixed pigments from the earth, and who painted a vision that would outlast their entire world. They did not know that we would be watching 40,000 years later. They did not care. They painted because they had to. They painted because they were human. And that is the only answer that matters. And yet, the question lingers like smoke from an extinguished flame. We may never know the full truth, and perhaps that is the point. The mystery is part of the gift they left behind, a silence that speaks louder than any recorded word. They chose the deepest caves, the hardest to reach, the places where the earth held its breath. Not for an audience, but for the act itself, for the moment when hand met stone and the world became something new. Think of the weight of that first stroke, the risk of entering the dark with only a flickering torch for company, the smell of damp rock, the sound of dripping water, the pulse of the heart in the stillness. They painted animals that ran, that fought, that died. They painted hands that reached out from the past, pressing against the same surface we now study. Those hands are yours. The same fingers, the same bones, the same longing to leave a trace. We call them primitive, but they master materials without formulas. They saw the shape of a bison in a bulge of rock, and they followed it. They knew the earth was alive, and they spoke to it in pigment. Our cities, our screens, our languages, they're just new caves. We still paint our dreams on the walls of our time. The difference is only the tool. They used ochre and charcoal. We use pixels and ink. But the core remains, a creature standing before the void and choosing to fill it with meaning. So when you close your eyes tonight, imagine the flicker of firelight on limestone. Imagine the cold seeping through your skin and the warmth of purpose in your chest. That is where we came from. That is where we still return in every quiet moment of creation. The caves are not gone. They are inside you, and the paint is still wet. The first painter was not an artist. They were a witness. They watched the sun rise and set, and they felt the weight of time passing. They saw a child grow, a deer fall, a friend vanish into the earth. And they asked, without words, what does it mean to be here? The cave wall became a mirror for that question. Every stroke of ochre was a prayer, a record, a defiance of silence. They did not paint for us, but we cannot help but listen. The bison on the ceiling is not just a bison. It is a memory of a hunt, a hunger, a breath held. The handprint is not just a hand. It is a signature of existence, a claim that I was here. We search for meaning in the stars, in the soil, in the code of our genes. But the answer was always on the walls, in the flicker of a torch. They painted because they could not bear the emptiness. They painted because the world was too vast to hold in thought alone. The deer on the rock is not dead. It runs forever in the flame. The shaman in the corner does not dance. They move through time itself. We call it art, but it was life raw and unpolished. They mixed blood with earth to make red, and that color still stains our dreams. We build cathedrals of glass and steel, but the first cathedral was a cave. We write poems on paper, but the first poem was a line of charcoal on stone. The fear of being forgotten is ancient, older than any civilization. The cave painter knew that death would take them, but the image might remain. So they pressed their hand against the wall, and the wall pressed back. That contact, that moment, is still alive. We touch the same rock, and we feel the same pulse. The animals they painted are not extinct. They live in our myths, our stories, our nightmares. The lion in the cave is the lion in our heart, the one we still hunt and fear. The horse on the wall is the horse we ride in our imagination. They did not copy nature, they summoned it. They called the spirit of the hunt into the stone, and the stone answered. We have forgotten how to listen, stone. We have traded the torch for the screen, the echo for the algorithm. But the cave is patient. It waits for us to return, to remember that we are made of the same dust. The paint is still wet because the act of creation never ends. Every child who draws on a wall is a cave painter. Every graffiti artist with a spray can is a shaman marking territory. Every photograph we take is a handprint on the digital limestone. The urge to leave a trace is older than language, older than tools. It is the first word we ever spoke and the last we will ever say. So when you look at the stars, know that you are looking at the same sky they painted. When you touch your own hand, know that you are touching the same hand that touched the cave. The distance between us is only time, and time is a thin veil. The fire is still burning. The torch is passed to you. If you want to keep the fire alive, subscribe to Le Premier Mech.